Ma!
O Nanu?
Ma, huwag niyo muna akong uutusan. Gagawa ko report sa Lunes na to eh.
Wah, sige.
A few minutes later.
Game. Ano kayong uunahin ko? Written report o PowerPoint? Aralin ko muna ata. Tingin nyo, kayo nga mag-decide. Okay, sige. Aralin ko muna siguro to. Sandali nga. Parang ang complex naman. Nood na lang yata ako sa YouTube ng discussion. Mas mapapadali nun, no? Ayos, search ko na.
Good day everybody, I am Bea Tagaza and today I'll be tackling Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, and the development of behaviorism. Behaviorism theory surmises that human and animal behavior can only be explained by conditioning. Behaviorists believe that psychology should focus on measurable and observable physical behavior and how these behaviors can be manipulated by changes in the external environment. It is likewise a theory of cognition that focuses on behavior. In other words, there is no room for behaviorist theory for thoughts, feelings, emotion, or motivation in contrast to other theories of psychology. Moving forward to the four main psychologists who led to the development of behaviorist theory were Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, and Bandura. Alright, first let's tackle Pavlov. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was the first to introduce the concept of conditioning through his experiment with animals. His conclusions directly influenced Watson and provided him with the original scientific basis for his beliefs. In this experiment, Pavlov worked with dogs that, like most, salivated naturally in the presence of food. Since this response is innate, the animals were displaying an unconditioned response, which is salivation, to an unconditioned stimulus to food. Pavlov then, for the sake of experimentation, began to produce a metronome sound at the time of its feeding. Eventually, the dogs started to drool after hearing it, and in anticipation of food even when none was present. At the end of his experiment, Pavlov was able to condition or teach these dogs to salivate in a natural situation by just producing and after hearing a sound to stimuli which would normally not elicit the response. In essence, Pavlov had transformed salivation into a conditioned behavior, and the metronome had become a conditioned stimulus. Pavlov further discovered that conditioned behaviors of this type would disappear if they failed to deliver the expected outcome. For instance, if the metronome was sounded repeatedly and no food was presented, dogs would eventually stop associating the two and their drooling response to the sound would eventually vanish. Let us now proceed to Thorndike. Edward Thorndike came up with the concept of instrumental conditioning and, like Pavlov, reached his main conclusions using data gained through animal-based experimentation. Such experiments included placing hungry cats in an enclosed container, which Thorndike referred to as puzzle box, from which they had to escape in order to reach food. The first time a cat was placed in the situation, it escaped only after several failed attempts and a single lucky cat. Such experiments including placing hungry cats in an enclosed container, which Thorndike referred to as puzzle box, from which they had to escape in order to reach food. The first time a cat was placed in this situation, it escaped only after several failed attempts and a single lucky successful guess, such as pushing the right button. However, the time it took to escape decreased each time a cat was returned to the box. This meant, first of all, that the cats remembered which behavior was necessary to escape and get the reward of food. If they had not, it would take approximately the same time for them to refigure it out, and there would not be the trend of a continually faster escape. Secondly, they were clearly able to recognize their current situation, wherein they are being placed in a puzzle box was identical to the last time they were placed inside of the puzzle box, and therefore that the same successful behavior used before would achieve the same end result the next time around: freedom and feast. Using his data, Thorndike developed two main laws concerning conditioning. The first was the law of exercise, stating simply that the repetition of a response strengthens it. Each time a cat was placed in the puzzle box, it exhibited a stronger inclination to perform the behaviors required, exiting the box with increased proficiency and in a shorter time span. The second law, the law of effect, established that behaviors were either strengthened or weakened depending on whether they were rewarded or punished. Each time the successful behavior was repeated, it was done so more quickly because the cat no longer wasted time, proven unsuccessful, and kept the animal in prison. To put it another way, learn from the mistakes of others. Alright, I hope we are all on the same boat. Anyway, next one is Skinner. B.F. Skinner developed the behaviorist theory of operant conditioning. Contrary to the theories of both Watson and Pavlov, Skinner believed that it wasn't what comes before a behavior that influences it, but rather what comes directly after it. In operant conditioning, behaviors are manipulated when they are followed by either positive or negative. Positive reinforcement increases desired behaviors by following them with rewards. For example, if a rat is dispensed every time a rat pushes a pedal, it will repeatedly push the same pedal to get more edible treats. The action of pushing the pedal, the desired behavior, has been reinforced with food. On the other hand, negative reinforcement increases desired behaviors by allowing subjects to escape punishment through their performance. For example, if a rat received a painful electrical jolt that would not cease unless it pressed a pedal, it would begin to press it quickly, following each initial jolt to relieve its pain. The action of pushing the pedal, the desired behavior, has again been reinforced, though by a different method than before. Skinner also showed that behavior could be altered through punishment or extinction. Punishing behaviors after they occur discourages them from being later repeated. For instance, if a rat was jolted with electricity when it pressed a pedal, it would begin to avoid touching it, avoiding performing the undesirable behavior. In other words, if you omit a mistake and you suffered from the consequences, of course, you'll not do the same thing anymore. Instead, you'll try a new option or process that you think is effective, right? Anyway, let's move to extinction. It is when behaviors that were previously reinforced are later unenforced, rendering the behaviors inconsequential and causing them to decrease in frequency over time. If the rat that had been trained to push a pedal ceased receiving food for pressing it, eventually it would press it less and less often. In time, after it has become thoroughly discouraged by the lack of dispensed rat treat, it may stop pressing it altogether. If the rat that was zapped with electricity stopped being zapped, it would also push the pedal to stop the voltage less frequently, as its reason for doing so would be gone. Extinction is the discontinuation of behaviors that had been encouraged by either negative or positive reinforcement. Last but of course not the least is Albert Bandura. Bandura's theory added social element into the picture. He argued that people can learn new information and behaviors by watching others. This is considered modeling and can explain a wide variety of behaviors we see in people. Social learning theory, theorized by Albert Bandura, posits that people learn from one another by observation, imitation, and modeling. The theory has often been called a bridge between behaviorist and cognitive learning theories because it encompasses attention, memory, and motivation. To make it short, behavior is learned from the environment through the process of observational learning. For instance, you don't know how to create layouts. And of course, to produce a publicity material, you have to be familiar with an application, let's say Photoshop. But you just act like, oh, it's not for me, it's so confusing, it has a lot of tools, but then you really need to learn on how to use it. And so you'll start watching someone else, a tutorial maybe, and with that, you'll be able to produce a PubMod because you already acquired the skills needed. That is what Albert Bandura, a social cognitive psychologist, believes.
Oh, ganun pala yung behaviorism. Ang galing naman ng discuss nun. Next naman, cognitivism.
Cognitivism. It is a learning theory that focuses on how information is received, organized, stored, and retrieved by the mind. It uses the mind as an information processor like a computer. Let us move on to color learning theory. This theory advocates that when a particular situation is being learned, it does not help to learn it in a part, but it helps to learn it as a whole. Kohler conducted experiments through chimpanzee in a laboratory at Canary Island. He conducted the following experiments based upon the box problem and some others on the stick problems. He inserted a hungry chimpanzee in a cage and hung bananas at the ceiling and placed a stick and a wooden box inside. The result of the experiments are, learning is achieved not by trial and error method, but on the chimpanzee's intelligence. Second, the first situation has to understood along the inner relation involved therein. One can solve the problem through experience gained. Let us move on to information processing theory by George A. Miller. This theory provides two theoretical ideas that has fundamental to cognitive psychology and the information processing framework. The first concept is chunking and the capacity of the short-term memory. Miller presented the idea that short-term memory could only hold 5 to 9 chunks of information, where a chunk is a meaningful unit. A chunk could refer to digits, words, chess position, or people's faces. The concept of chunking or the limited capacity of short-term memory became a basic element of a subsequent theories of memory. The classic example of chunk is the ability to remember long subsequent of binary numbers because they can be coded into decimal form. The classic example of thought is a plan of hammering a nail. The exit test is where the nail is flush with the surface. If the nail sticks up, then the hammer is tested to see if it's up. Otherwise, it is raised, and the hammer is allowed to hit the nail. Let us move on to David Ausubel's subsumption theory. This theory is concerned with how individuals learn large amount of meaningful materials from verbal textual presentation in a school setting.
Ausubel's clearly indicates that this theory applies only to reception learning in school. He distinguishes reception learning from the rote and discovery learning. The former because it doesn't involve subsumption, and the latter because the learner must discover information through problem solving. A large number of studies have been conducted on the effect of the advanced organization in learning.
Tyson, kain ka na muna.
Ma, kakain na ba ako? Tatapusin ko na muna to. Das naman na yata eh. Tapusin ko na, no? Sige na nga, kain na muna ako.
A few minutes later.
Nasa humanism na ako, no?
Now, let us tackle humanistic theory by psychologist Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was a humanistic psychologist. He supported the views of Maslow and added an environment with genuineness, acceptance, and empathy as needed for a person to grow. Rogers believed that a person reaches to self-actualization level when they achieve their goals, wishes, and desires at all stages of their life. Humanistic psychology emphasized the role of an individual in shaping their internal and external world. He was with the view that humans are active and creative people who live in the present and are concerned with only relationships, perceptions, and situations in the present. Rogers' personality development theory was formed to highlight free will and human potential for goodness. Then let's talk about personality development and self-concept under humanistic psychology. Rogers' theory of personality development was based on humanistic psychology. According to his approach, everyone exists in a world full of experiences. These experiences shape our reactions that include external objects and people, also internal thoughts and emotions. This is known as their phenomenal field. Phenomenal field means a person's reality, objects, behavior, thoughts, and people.
Furthermore, Roger believed that a person's behavior is a factor motivated by self-actualization tendencies to work and achieve the highest level of their potential and achievement. During this process, a person forms a structure of self or self-concept. A positive self-concept is associated with feeling and good self. Now let us proceed to Carl Rogers' views on ideal self versus real self. Rogers divided the self into two categories. Rogers divided self into two categories: ideal and real self. The ideal self is the person you would like to be, and the real self is what you really are. In the real world, a person's ideal self is not consistent with what happens in life with a person. Incongruence is the difference between the ideal self and actual experiences. Congruence is when our thoughts about our real self and ideal self are very similar.
Okay, last na, constructivism.
Good day guys! Welcome to my educational vlog. And so our topic for today is about constructivism. So when we say constructivism, it's a theory of knowledge that argues that human generates knowledge and meaning from an interaction between their experiences and their ideas. It has long been applied in the field of education. So there are three major theories or philosophers who viewed learning as a constructivist process. The first one is Jerome Bruner of 1990. Bruner's theory emphasizes that learning is an active process in which learners construct new ideas or concepts based upon their current or past knowledge. The learners select and transform information, construct hypotheses, and make decisions relying on the cognitive structure to do so. When we say cognitive structure, it is the schema or mental models that provides meaning and organization to experiences and allow the individual to go beyond the information given. He believes that as far as instruction is concerned, the instructor should try and encourage students to discover principles by themselves. The instructor and the student should engage in an active dialogue, or example of active dialogue is Socratic learning. The task of the instructor is to translate information to be learned into a format appropriate to the learner's current state of understanding. Curriculum should be organized in a spiral manner so that the student continually builds upon what they already learned. Bruner's 1996 states that a theory of construction or instruction, should address four major aspects. The first one is predisposition toward learning. The second is the way in which a body of knowledge can be structured so that it can be most readily grasped by the learner. Thirdly, the most effective sequence in which to present materials. And lastly, the nature of pacing of rewards and punishment. Good methods of instructing knowledge should result in simplifying, generating new propositions, and increase the manipulation of information. Now, let us proceed to the second philosopher, who is Jean Piaget of 1972. Piaget's theory of constructivism argues that people produce knowledge and form meaning based upon their experiences. According to him, there are two components that creates the construction of an individual's new knowledge: accommodation and assimilation. So when we say assimilation, assimilating causes an individual to incorporate new experiences into the old experiences. The causes of the individual to develop new outlook, rethink what were once misunderstanding, and evaluate what is important, ultimately altering their perception. Next is accommodation. Accommodation is reframing the world and new experiences into the mental capacity that is already present. Individuals conceive a particular fashion in which the world operates. When things do not operate within the context, they must accommodate and reframing the expectations with the outcomes. And now, let us embark on the last major theories, Lev Vygotsky of 1978. Vygotsky's theory states that knowledge is co-constructed and that individuals learn from one another. His theory is called social constructivist theory because, in his opinion, learners must be engaged in the learning process. He believes that learning happens with the assistance of other people. Vygotsky emphasized the role of language and culture in cognitive development. In order to fully understand Vygotsky theory, we must know the two main principles of his work. The first one is more knowledgeable adder, or MKO, and the second one is zone of proximal development, or ZPD. The first one is the more knowledgeable adder, or MKO. Refers to someone who has a better understanding or a higher ability level than the learner with respect to a particular task, process, or concept. So in this case, or inside the classroom setting, it is more likely the teacher. But for outside or outside the school, it is actually someone who has a better knowledge to the child. The next one is zone of proximal development, or ZPD. The concept of the MKO is integrally related to this principle. Taken together, the MKO and the ZPD form the basis of the scaffolding components of the cognitive apprenticeship model of instruction. Vygotsky defines the ZPD as the distance between the actual developmental as determined by independent problem solving and level of potential development as determined through problem solving under the adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. Vygotsky believed that when a student is at ZPD for a particular task, providing the appropriate assistance, or what we call scaffolding, will give the student enough of a boost to achieve the task. Once the student, with the benefit of scaffolding, masters the task, the scaffolding can be removed and the student will be able to complete the task again on his own. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you've learned something. Thank you!
Mabilis lang pala intindihin, no? Buti na lang ito yung napunta sa akin topic. Sobrang applicable nito sa classroom. Kumbaga, ito yung pinaka na-perform ng basis para sa education eh. Psychological foundations will help us in understanding the individual differences among our students. Ang ganda ng concept. Ay wait, mag-aalauna na pala. Tulog na ata ako. Bukas na to, ako na magde-decide, matutulog na ako. Bye guys!